You wake up and reach for your phone before your eyes have fully adjusted to the morning light, your hand already knowing where it is on the nightstand, always within reach, like a talisman you can't sleep without. The screen illuminates, and for those first few seconds you're somewhere else, not in your body or your bed, but inside a stream of information, a feed of other lives, a cascade of everything except the room you're actually in. And here's what nobody tells you about this moment. You've just left yourself behind. One moment you're a person waking up in a specific place with a specific body and the particular quality of morning light coming through your particular window, and the next moment you're everywhere and nowhere, scrolling through someone's vacation in Bali, a news alert about something terrible happening on the other side of the world, a friend's carefully curated breakfast, an advertisement that somehow knows you are thinking about buying new sheets. You've become an observer of life before you've had a chance to be a participant in your own. Living through a screen means not just using technology, but experiencing your existence as something that happens at a distance, mediated and filtered, and translated into pixels that refresh 60 times per second. You are here, but also perpetually elsewhere. Present, but also always absent. Yourself, but also watching yourself from the outside, and wondering how this moment would look if you posted it, if you captured it, if you could make it mean something to people who aren't in the room. A strange doubling happens where you're living, but also curating, experiencing, but also documenting, feeling, but also performing. And somewhere in that split, something essential goes missing. The direct sensation of being alive, unmediated and unwitnessed and uncommented upon, becomes increasingly rare and almost foreign. You might notice this most in moments that should be simple, like when you're eating dinner and your phone is face down on the table and you can feel it there, not just physically, but psychologically. A low hum of potential interruption exists, a background radiation of elsewhereness that you can't quite turn off because someone might need you, or something might be happening, or the world is continuing without you, and you're missing it, even though you're right here. Supposedly present and supposedly engaged in this meal, this conversation, this moment. The screen has become the place where things feel real, more real sometimes than the unfiltered and unshared experiences happening in your actual life. You go somewhere beautiful, and your first instinct isn't to let it wash over you, or to let yourself be changed by it, but to capture it, to frame it, to think about how others will receive it. Which means the moment exists most fully, not when you're in it, but when you've translated it into content, when it's been validated by others, when it's become part of your digital narrative. And here's the deeper truth, the one that sits uncomfortably in your chest when you're honest with yourself. You're not sure who you are when no one's watching. When there's no screen to reflect a version of yourself back to you, curated and edited and presented just so, you lose something. Because the mirror of the screen shows you a self you can control and adjust and perfect. But it never reflects you back the way a real mirror does, with all your unedited humanness, your morning face, your unguarded moments, your existence before you've had a chance to compose it. You are living at a distance from your own life. And the strangest part is that it doesn't feel like a problem most of the time because it feels normal, like just how things are now. Like everyone else is doing it too, so it must be okay. But every so often, in those increasingly rare moments, when you look up from your screen and really see the room you're in, really feel the weight of your body in the chair, really notice the quality of silence or the specific way the light falls, you get this vertiginous sense that you've been gone for a very long time and you're not entirely sure how to come back. Your brain is not the same as it was before you carried a portal to infinite information in your pocket. And this isn't metaphor, but neuroscience, the quiet revolution happening inside your skull that's rewiring the very architecture of how you think, how you feel, how you experience the passage of time, and the texture of your own consciousness. Every time your phone buzzes or a notification appears, or you refresh your feed just to see if something new has materialized, your brain releases a tiny hit of dopamine, the same neurotransmitter involved in addiction and anticipation, and the feeling that something rewarding might be just around the corner. Not the reward itself, but the possibility of it, the maybe, the what if. And here's what makes this so insidious. You're not being rewarded on a predictable schedule, but variably, intermittently, unpredictably. Sometimes you check and there's something exciting like a message from someone you care about, or a post that makes you laugh, or validation in the form of likes or comments. And sometimes there's nothing, which is the same mechanism that keeps people pulling slot machine levers, the particular desperation of gambling addiction. Your brain learns that checking might bring reward, and the might is more powerful than the certainty. So you check and check and check again. Not because you want to or even because you've decided to, but because your brain has been trained to seek that little spike of possibility, that micro dose of maybe something good. But something else is happening too, something more profound than simple behavioral conditioning, because your attention itself is changing shape. Human attention was historically designed to focus deeply on single tasks, to enter states of absorption where time seems to disappear and you merge with what you're doing, which is flow, the state in which we do our best thinking and our most creative work and our deepest relating, all of which requires sustained and uninterrupted focus. The screen fractures this by teaching your brain to expect interruption, to anticipate the next stimulus, to never quite settle into anything for too long. You're reading an article, but you're also aware that you could switch to another tab, or check a message or see what's happening elsewhere, which means even when you're trying to focus, part of your mind is already reaching for the next thing, the next hit of novelty, the next micro-stimulation. Your attention becomes skittish and shallow and unable to hold still, and when you try to read something long or think about something complex or sit with something difficult, you feel this restlessness, this agitation, this sense that you should be doing something else or checking something else or moving on to the next thing. The screen has taught you that boredom is an emergency, that stillness is wasted time, that depth is optional. Time itself starts feeling different because screen time collapses duration into discrete and swipeable units. An hour disappears into the feed, but it doesn't feel like an hour, more like nothing or 5 minutes or time that doesn't count and isn't quite real. And then suddenly it's midnight, and you're still scrolling, and you don't know where the evening went, and the time wasn't restful or engaging, but just consumed. This is the compression of experience where life through a screen moves faster and flickers more rapidly and offers more stimulation per second. But it's all surface with no depth, no lingering, no slow unfolding of understanding. Everything is optimized for immediate impact, for instant reaction, for the quick hit of emotion before you move on to the next post, the next video, the next thing demanding your attention. And your brain, plastic and adaptive as it is, learns to prefer this pace, which means real life starts feeling slow by comparison. Conversations that require patience, books that demand sustained attention, experiences that unfold gradually, all begin to feel arduous because your capacity for slowness atrophies and you're being trained for speed, for surface, for the rapid consumption of content rather than the deep digestion of experience. But perhaps most profoundly, the screen is changing your sense of self, because you've always had an inner life with private thoughts and unspoken feelings, and the quiet narrative you tell yourself about who you are and what you're experiencing. Except now this inner life is being externalized and translated into posts and stories and updates. You're not just thinking and feeling, but thinking and feeling with an audience in mind, even when that audience is hypothetical. You catch yourself narrating your own experience in captions, framing your emotions as content, thinking about how to describe something before you've fully felt it. And the boundary between your inner world and your public presentation is becoming permeable and dissolving. In that dissolution, something private and essential is being lost. Your thoughts are becoming louder and more performative, and less able to simply exist without needing to be shared or validated or witnessed. Which means the interior space where you used to meet yourself, where you used to work things out in solitude, where understanding emerged slowly and privately, that space is shrinking. And you can feel it, can't you, the way it's becoming harder to just be with yourself without the screen as mediator, without the promise of connection or validation or distraction. You are being rewired for a different kind of consciousness, one that is faster and more fragmented and more externally focused and more dependent on constant stimulation and validation. And your brain, marvelously adaptive, is learning exactly what you're teaching it. There's a moment you might recognize where you're somewhere beautiful, maybe at a sunset or a quiet moment with someone you love, and you're watching it happen, but you're also thinking about the photograph, the angle, the light. Whether this will translate through the lens, whether others will understand why this matters, whether this moment will perform well as content. And in that split second of consideration, the moment itself slips away because you were there, but you were also already gone, already thinking about the moment as past, as something to be packaged and presented, which means the experience becomes secondary to its documentation, and the feeling becomes less important than its communication. This is the quiet grief of living through screens. Not that we're using technology, but that we're increasingly unable to let experiences exist only for ourselves, unmarked by audience, unvalidated by others, uncurated into narrative. We're losing the ability to have private and unshareable and purely subjective experiences that don't need to mean anything to anyone but us. You went to a concert once, maybe, and watched the entire thing through your phone screen, recording it and capturing it, and making sure you had proof that you were there, and then you got home and never watched the video. But you also don't quite remember the concert itself, not the felt experience of it, not the way the music moved through your body, not the particular quality of being present in that moment, because you were there, but you were also removed. One step back, observing and documenting rather than surrendering and experiencing. When life becomes content, the living of it becomes subordinate to the telling of it, and the experience itself flattens into material for your ongoing narrative, your personal brand, your digital presence. Something ineffable is lost in that translation. The texture and the weight and the unmediated reality of just being somewhere, just feeling something, just existing without the need to make it legible to others. There's a deeper loneliness in this than you might expect because you're sharing more than humans have ever shared. Your thoughts and your meals and your daily movements and your opinions on everything. You're more visible than people in any previous generation, and yet you feel unseen in a way that's hard to articulate. What you're sharing isn't quite you, but a performance of you, a version of you that's been edited and filtered and carefully composed. And the messy parts, the boring parts, the parts that don't fit your narrative or photograph well or make sense to others, those parts don't make it through. So you're sharing constantly, but you're not actually being known. You're being seen, but the self that's being seen is partial and curated and designed for consumption. And the people in your life, you're relating to them differently now too. Not just in person, with the fullness of presence and attention and embodied reality, but also, maybe primarily, through screens. Through their posts and your posts, through comments and reactions, through the carefully selected moments they choose to share. Which means you follow the narrative of their lives, but you don't necessarily know them, because you see their vacation photos, but you weren't there. You see their achievements, but you don't know their struggles. You know what they ate for dinner, but you don't know what keeps them up at night. This is parasocial intimacy. The feeling of closeness without the reality of it, where you can feel deeply connected to people you never speak to, whose lives you observe from a distance, who you know through their digital presence, but not through shared experience. And sometimes those connections feel more real and more manageable and more satisfying than the complicated messiness of actual relationships, which require time and vulnerability and the risk of being truly seen. But there's no weight to these connections, and no substance, so you can scroll through hundreds of lives, feel momentarily connected to dozens of people, and still end the day feeling profoundly alone. Unsure if anyone really knows you, unsure if you really know anyone else. And solitude, true solitude where you're alone with your thoughts, and there's no escape and no distraction, and no feed to scroll through, has become almost unbearable. You can't remember the last time you were truly alone with yourself for more than a few minutes, because there's always the phone, always the option to check in, to see what's happening, to fill the silence with someone else's voice, someone else's thoughts, someone else's life. But solitude is where you meet yourself, where thoughts settle and feelings clarify, and you figure out what you actually think and feel without the input of everyone else. Solitude is where self-knowledge happens, and you're losing access to it, losing the capacity to just be with yourself, without immediately reaching for relief, for distraction, for the comforting hum of other people's existence to fill the space where your own thoughts should be. You are living in public even when you're alone, and there's a part of you that's starting to forget what it feels like to exist without witnesses, without documentation, without the need to translate your experience into something others can consume. There's a moment when you put your phone down, really put it down and not just set it aside while you do something else. And you notice the silence. Not the absence of sound, but the absence of that low-level hum of connectivity. That perpetual sense of being tethered to elsewhere. And in that silence, something in you exhales, some part of you that's been holding itself in readiness and in anticipation and in constant low-grade vigilance. That part softens. This is where it begins, not with dramatic renunciation or self-flagellation about how much time you've wasted, but with noticing, with becoming aware of the quality of your attention, the texture of your presence, the difference between being here and being perpetually elsewhere. You start recognizing the signs like the automatic reach for your phone when there's a moment of stillness, the anxiety that rises when you don't check for too long, the way your mind has learned to expect constant stimulation and constant newness and constant connection. And rather than judging yourself for this, you can simply observe it with curiosity and with gentleness. Because this is what your brain has learned. This is the shape your attention has taken. And like anything learned, it can be gently and patiently reshaped. What you're reaching for isn't a life without technology, which is neither realistic nor particularly desirable, but agency, the ability to choose when you're present and when you're not, rather than being pulled constantly into elsewhere by forces you didn't consciously consent to. You're reclaiming your attention from the algorithms that have learned to capture it, from the notifications designed to interrupt you, from the feeds engineered to keep you scrolling. You start building what you might call intentional friction, small barriers between impulse and action that give you space to choose. Turning off notifications happens not because you're rejecting connection, but because you're claiming the right to decide when you connect rather than being summoned constantly by other people's timelines. And you put your phone in another room while you eat, while you read, while you talk to someone you care about. Not as punishment, but as practice in being fully where you are. And at first it feels uncomfortable because the urge to check is strong and insistent and almost physical. Your brain protesting because it's learned to expect those little hits of dopamine, those moments of novelty, and it wants them. But if you can sit with that discomfort, if you can let the urge arise and pass without acting on it, something shifts and the grip loosens and your attention begins to remember that it can rest on one thing, can deepen into one experience, can stay present without constantly reaching for the next stimulus. You practice letting moments be unrecorded by going somewhere beautiful and not taking out your phone, letting the experience exist only in your memory, only in your body, only in the subjective and unshareable realm of your own consciousness. And there's a richness to this that surprises you, the way the experience sinks in more deeply when you're not trying to capture it, when you're not already thinking about how to frame it for others. You let yourself be bored, which feels radical and almost transgressive. Sitting on the bus without your phone, waiting in line without filling the time, letting your mind wander and letting thoughts arise and drift, and letting yourself experience the particular quality of empty time that humans have experienced for millennia, but that has become so rare in the age of infinite content. And in that boredom, something happens where your mind starts generating its own entertainment through ideas and connections and daydreams, the creativity that gets drowned out by constant stimulation beginning to resurface. You're relearning what presence feels like, the way it settles in your body, the way time seems to expand when you're fully in it, rather than half absent, the way conversations deepen when you're not partly monitoring your phone, when you're giving someone the increasingly rare gift of your full attention. You notice how hungry people are for this, for someone to actually be there, to actually listen, to actually see them without the mediation of screens. And slowly your relationship with solitude begins to shift, where those moments alone with your thoughts become less threatening, and less empty. You start recognizing solitude as necessary and as restorative, and as the space where you remember who you are underneath all the performance and curation, and you begin to trust your own inner life again, to value your own thoughts, even when they're not being shared or validated by others. This doesn't mean you withdraw completely, because you still connect and still share and still participate in the digital world, but you do so more consciously and more selectively. You curate your experience rather than letting it be curated for you, following people and accounts that add something meaningful to your life, and unfollowing the ones that leave you feeling diminished or agitated. And you set boundaries around when and how you engage, rather than being perpetually available, perpetually responsive, perpetually present to everyone's needs except your own. You start noticing the difference between connection and consumption. Because real connection, the kind that nourishes rather than depletes, requires time and requires depth, and requires the vulnerability of actual conversation rather than the safety of asynchronous posting. So you reach out more directly, calling instead of texting, meeting in person when you can, prioritizing the relationships that feel substantial over the hundreds of tenuous connections that fill your feed but don't touch your life. And you give yourself permission to protect your inner world, to keep some things private, to have thoughts and feelings and experiences that exist only for you, that don't need to be translated into content or shaped into narrative. You remember that there's dignity in privacy, in the unshared and unwitnessed moments that make up the texture of a human life. You are here now, not perfectly and not constantly, but more often than before. And when you notice yourself drifting away, pulled back into the perpetual elsewhere of screens, you can gently bring yourself back, not with force and not with judgment, but with the simple recognition that this moment, this ordinary and unfiltered and unmediated moment is your actual life. And it deserves your presence. You deserve to be fully in it, to feel its weight, to let it matter in the uncurated way that real things matter. The screen will always be there with its infinite content and its endless novelty and its promise of connection and distraction and elsewhere. But so will you, right here, in your body, in this room, in this singular and irreplaceable moment of being alive. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's everything.